is Dr. Marissa May. In this video, we're going to take a look at writing the equation for a trig graph. Now, in my classes, students tended to like to have the equation first and they plot the graph. But I want to make sure that they can go both ways. So I present the graph of a trig equation and ask them to write it. Now, let's review the general form of a trig graph or a trig equation. We've got some amplitude that goes in front. And you've got sine or cosine. We'll do cosine first. 2 pi over the period, b. Then you've got some left or right shift, and then some up or down shift. So these are all of the components that we'll need to identify from this graph in order to write the equation. So the first thing I like students to do is to find the midline. That's the halfway point in this graph. It is the middle between the high and the low point. So you can see in this graph, the low point happens at a y value of -1, and the high value happens at a y value of 5. Halfway between -1 and 5 would be at y equals 2. And I like my students to draw that as a dashed line. This is what is often referred to as the axis of the wave or the midline. Those are two different ways to say the same thing. Now that you have your midline, I want to tell you, you have your up or down shift because your midline, your axis of the wave, is going to be the same. So you know this is +2. All right, now we find the amplitude, the first number in our equation, from the midline to the highest point, or from the midline to the lowest point. That should be the same value. Okay, so if you go from your midline to your high value of 5, then you know your amplitude is 3. We'll decide later on if that should be a +3 or a -3. But since I know the amplitude has to be positive, I'm just going to put the 3 there, and I'll evaluate if it needs to be positive or negative in a minute. Now I've got my cosine. 2 pi over, now remember I said that b is going to be your period. So that means you've got to determine how long this cycle is. The way I do that is to go from hill to hill or valley to valley. So you can see in this graph, I don't have a maximum to a maximum drawn. I only have one maximum, but I do have a minimum to a minimum. I just have to be careful because my axes are labeled in trig or in radians, so I have to be careful. You'll notice that it takes me 2 increments to get to pi, so I know each of these are half a pi. So let's count from here, from one valley to the other value, but remember we've got to count by half a pi's. So that's half a pi, a whole pi, 3 halves a pi, 2 whole pi's, 5 halves pi, and then 3 pi. So that tells me my period here is 3 pi. So I'm going to put a 3 pi down there for my b value. So again, that b value is my period, and I have to count from either hill to hill or valley to valley in order to get that. And we'll simplify here in just a moment. Our last piece is that left or right shift. And this depends on if you're looking at writing a sine or a cosine graph. Now, I'm writing a cosine graph. Hint, hint, it's easier. The reason cosine's easier is because if you'll remember from the normal trig graph, cosine starts on a hill at 0, 1. So if we are going to phase shift or shift this graph left or right, we would take that hill that is normally on the y-axis and we would shift it to the first hill you see on this graph. Well, the first hill I see on this graph is at pi. So I know this graph has been shifted right pi. Now friends, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret, okay? I could have shifted this to a valley. I could have easily shifted it to this valley. But because cosine starts on a hill, if I'm gonna shift to a valley, you have to do a reflection. You have to make this number negative. So I also could get the same graph if I make this y equals -3. Instead of starting on a hill, it would start in a valley. And then same period, same upshift, okay? But this time I would be shifting to the valley, which would be left pi over 2. Okay, so there's lots of ways. In fact, I could write other equations that would produce this same graph. But I want to show you two of the most common, where you can shift to the first hill, or you can shift to the first valley as long as you make that number in front a negative. Of course, you would want to simplify here to just 2/3, but other than that, I would leave it for my equation. And let's recap. You start by finding the midline. That tells you your up or down shift. From the midline, you count to your hill, or you count to your valley to get your amplitude. That's your number in front. To get your number for B, you're going to go valley to valley or hill to hill to get your period. And then if you're doing cosine, you're going to shift to your first hill, or you shift to your valley by making it negative. I hope this helps you as you're writing equations for your trig graphs.